and they're just getting ready to head to the picture show in the truck. Oops, I'm gonna need my glasses. Getting old, you guys. He stood smiling, that's Newt, and we all clambered in. That is, Glennis, Claire, and Newt got in front. Louis climbed in the rear of the truck and sat on the bed, his back to the cab, and Harris and I joined him. I still had no idea where we were going, but everybody was so glad to be doing it that I fell in with the enthusiasm. "We don't get to town that often," Harris screamed. A full bellow was necessary to override the sound of the engine. There was no muffler at all and very little tailpipe. What pipe there was ended at the front of the bed, so the full din of the engine came up around us. "It's the best thing there is, especially if we get some pop to go with the picture show." I got about every third word, and he had to translate over the engine sound, and he finally gave up. Newt turned right at the end of the driveway, and we started driving. Ricocheting might be a better word, down a mud track that went through miles of forest. When we'd done this for half an hour, we came into a clearing a mile across, hacked out of the forest the way Newt's farm had been cleared. And in the middle of this clearing stood 4 frame buildings and a tall sheet metal covered grain elevator. A set of railroad tracks ran alongside and past the 4 buildings. Harris smiled widely and pointed. "Town!" I said nothing, but the way it looked reminded me of nothing so much as some villages I'd seen in the Philippine Islands, a scattered collection of huts thrown in the middle of nowhere. We bounced across the tracks, turned on a dirt road that went in front of the buildings, and stopped in front of a clapboard-sided shanty that seemed about to fall in on itself. It had no windows in the front or the sides, but an open door and a crude wooden porch across the front. Above the door in rough hand-painted letters were the words Lumberjack Lounge, and lounge is misspelled Lownge. The other 3 buildings looked much the same, except one of them had a glass window in the front and was apparently a dry goods store. I couldn't for the life of me see what everybody was so excited about. There were already 6 or 7 trucks parked in the street, not in any order, just left where they stopped, as Newt now did with our truck. And as the engine died with a gasp, a thin boy about my age walked out of the door and onto the porch. He was holding a bottle of Nesbitt's orange pop, and as soon as he saw our truck, he turned and tried to get back in the door. He was far too slow. "Hunsetter, you gooner!" Harris bellowed as he piled over the side of the truck. "Where the hell is my Aggie shooter?" Harris bounced once on the ground and then landed on top of the boy. Orange pop sprayed in the air as they went down and rolled into the street in a cloud of dirt and curses. It was a view of Harris I was becoming accustomed to, and I was wondering if I should help or get a bucket of water or pry them apart with a stick when Claire took my arm. "Come on inside, dear. They'll be in when they're done playing." It was becoming evening, and the room was dark. The only light came through the open door, and it took a moment for my eyes to get accustomed to the dim light. When they did, I saw a plank bar down the left side of the room with no stools, 3 tables on the right with benches instead of chairs. At the back of the room, there was a small wooden platform next to what I took to be a back door. On the platform, there were 2 fiddle cases and an accordion so big it seemed that it would take 2 men to play it. The room was full of people, all of a set piece with us, clean but in rough clothes. The women in starched dresses, the men in overalls. There were young people scattered here and there, all drinking Nesbitt's orange pop. Glennis and Claire waved at somebody and went to sit at the tables, while Newt and Louis went to stand near some men at the plank bar. I knew nobody, but for the moment, it didn't matter. I was watching Louis. He drank like he ate. A man in the back of the bar, also dressed in bib overalls, although he was wearing a tie with his work shirt, gave Louis and Newt each a tall, dark bottle of beer. Newt took a drink and put his down to speak next to a man next to him. But Louis stared straight ahead, and simply upended the bottle and pushed it into the back of his throat and drained it, licking the bottle opening dry with his tongue when it was empty. He set it on the bar, and the bartender brought him another one. He did the same. He kept doing this until I felt a tug at my sleeve and turned to see Harris. I hate a gooner that will steal a marble from a man. He looked some the worse for wear, being scuffed and dirty, and one suspender of his bib had come undone, but he was holding up a large cat's eye Aggie shooter marble with pride. He dropped the marble in his pocket and moved to the bar to stand next to Louis. I followed and was going to ask what had happened to the other boy when I saw him come into the room. He was in worse shape than Harris, seemed to be dragging a leg and favoring one arm, and was bleeding slightly from the nose, but had about the same amount of dirt on him and moved to stand with some grown-ups and ignored us. Harris looked up at the bartender and waited, and in a moment he handed us 2 orange pops. No money changed hands. I never saw any money for anything, beer or pop, pass over the bar, and I thought it must be free, but Harris corrected me later. It's writ down. Clell's got him a notebook and back, and he writes everything down. I'd like to have half of what's on that notebook. You could own every marble in the world. We stood by the end of the bar, not far from Newt and Louis, who were talking horses and crops to the other men at the bar. Or at least, Newt was. Louis was drinking beers whole, just as fast as Clell the bartender could bring them. He'll pee himself later, Harris said, noting that I was watching Louis. Just comes in the top and goes out the bottom like a pipe. Presently, 3 men separated themselves from the rest, and without speaking or further ado, mounted the platform, picked up the instruments, the smaller of the men hoisting the accordion with a short grunt, and began playing. It was barely music, sounded more like cats fighting inside a steel drum, but it was very loud and had a steady rhythm, and soon couples were dancing. Harris ignored the adults and kept watching the back door, or what I took to be the back door, with steady intensity. We had gone through our pop and been given new ones, and as soon as Clell handed us our pop, he started walking down the bar aimed for that door. Come on, Harris grabbed my arm. We want to get good seats. It was not a back door, but the door to a storeroom. I followed Harris in, blinded by more darkness yet, and could vaguely make out a room full of beer crates stacked around the sides, and in the middle on a wooden rickety table was an old motion picture projector, and on the wall a sheet had been hung. Harris dragged me to the center of the room and pulled 2 beer crates up to sit on, directly to the side of the projector, then waited impatiently, holding his pop with both hands while Clell and a dozen or so other young people came into the room. In the dim light from the door, Clell went to a box of what seemed to be car batteries on the side of the room and hooked 2 wires to the terminals with alligator clips. The projector came on, and its beam of light hit the sheet with a dazzling glare. Clell worked in silence while we sat waiting, feeding film from the old reel through the projector with many clicks and jerks, hooking it to the take-up reel. Then he hit a switch, and the projector started up with a noise not unlike the old truck that had brought us to town, and on the screen was a picture of Gene Autry riding and shooting. It would be wrong to call what we were watching a movie. I had been to many films by that time and recognized that there were problems with this one. The credits, and probably the first 15 or 20 minutes of the film, were gone, lost over years of showing. The picture just jumped right into the middle of the story with Gene riding Champ and shooting at somebody. And when the reel ran out some 30 minutes later, he was still riding Champ and shooting at somebody. Though it was a talking film, there was no sound equipment, so remained silent, and any idea of storyline from dialogue was lost. The whole film was devoted to Gene riding Champion and shooting at something, with one scene where he played a guitar and sang, and another where he jumped off a saloon roof onto Champion and rode away, either escaping some men in the saloon or trying to catch some other men who had run off. Then the reel ended with the screen going flash white again. Damn, Harris snorted. I just hate it when it ends that way. As if on cue, Clell came back in carrying a dozen bottles of orange pop in a wooden case. He handed us each a bottle, then rewound the film and started it over and went back out front where the music was getting louder and more incoherent all the time. And the children all sat and watched it again, as if seeing it for the first time. I leaned forward to whisper in Harris's ear, "Isn't there another reel?" "What?" "You know, a film. Isn't there another reel?" "Not unless you want to watch the news about the war. Clell's got that one, but it's really short." The war? The Second World War had been over for nearly 5 years. "Yeah, with the commie Japs and all. They're fighting like dogs over there, but it still ain't this good. Now shut up and watch the picture show." He turned back to Jean and we sat through another showing of the film. When it was done, Clell reappeared with orange pop, rewound the film, and started it over. And over, and over. On the fourth showing, I couldn't stand it any longer, and I left the back room to watch the goings-on in the front before I fell asleep. The room was lit by 2 Coleman lanterns hanging from the ceiling and full of smoke and sound. The music had gotten much louder, and there was a smell of beer and sweat. It seemed that all the married couples like Newt and Claire were dancing in the small center of the room, leaving the tables empty, and all the old men like Louis were standing at the bar. Some of them were talking. Louis was silent and still drinking the way he had before, a whole bottle at a time. He looked almost the same, but there was a glazed look in his eyes that hadn't been there before. And I did a little quick figuring and decided that if he'd been drinking at the same rate all along, he was probably well into 20 or 30 bottles by this time. I looked, and as Harris had said, Louis had peed his pants. I moved toward the tables to sit. This guy. I moved toward the tables to sit and watch the band, and as I walked past the end of the bar, Clell magically appeared and handed me another orange pop. This made me remember my bladder was bursting. There was no bathroom inside, so I went to use the one outside and stepped into total blackness and nearly broke my neck, and the bottle of pop falling from the porch. In a moment, my eyes became accustomed to the dark, and I saw that there were several young couples standing in pairs, holding hands, talking quietly. It took me some time to find the outhouse and use it and come back inside. I sat at a table, sipping pop and watching them dance, and within a few minutes, they slowed the music to a waltz, and it seemed absolutely impossible to keep my eyes open. I lay my head down on the table and closed my eyes, just for a moment, and everything from the day caught up with me and went sliding together, and within moments, I was sound asleep. I'm not sure how long I slept. When I opened my eyes, Newt was carrying me in one arm and Harris in the other. He put us gently in the back of the truck. I closed my eyes and awakened a moment later to see Newt carrying Louis out to put him in the truck as well. Louis was as stiff as a ramrod, his hands still holding the last bottle of beer he was drinking. Then not even the noise of the truck could keep me from sleep. And that is the end of that chapter.